Hi, and welcome to Triangle Spotlight. I am Suzanne Lynn. Joining us today, wow, what a story. Dr. Sheila D. Williams is joining us, and she's the author of a book called My Mother's Keeper. Dr. Sheila, thank you so much is that okay if I call you Dr. Sheila?
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Mhm.
First of all, just tell us where are you located right now? Where are you at?
I just recently relocated here. I'm in Houston,
Okay.
Texas. I've been
Mhm.
here about 8 or 9 months.
Okay. Okay. It's a little
Hmm.
different. I know that you were here in Orlando for a little while, and um,
Yes.
what your story is. You really caught my attention on LinkedIn because of the book that you wrote, My Mother's Keeper. Can we talk about what's the premise of that?
Well, the premise is, and thank you so much for having me. I'm excited
Yeah.
to be here. My mother's keeper is essentially that. I took care of my mother from the time I was about 10 years old until she passed away. What I didn't tell anyone, our family did not disclose, was that my mother had a mental illness. She suffered from clinical depression. So I essentially knew that at some point I needed to tell my complete story,
Hmm.
but I couldn't do that without getting her permission to tell her part of that. So
Wow.
I wanted to put a face and a name to mental illness, particularly how it can possibly look in the African American family. So I wrote My Mother's Keeper to not only tell her story, but to tell the story of so many that feel that they may not have a voice.
I can't imagine being a 10-year-old feeling the responsibility of the world of someone else. You can, barely know what's
Mhm.
going on with yourself. What type of responsibilities did you have for your mom at a young age?
Well, she was not diagnosed with clinical depression until I was about 24 or 25 years old. So I tell people all the time, if your norm, your reality is all you don't know that the house next door or the family up the street is living any differently.
Sure.
So the responsibilities that I had were just, to me, natural. But then I realized that my friends didn't have those responsibilities. So at times I would have to cook my own food, uh, you know, um, do laundry. I was doing laundry at like 9, preparing my own meals. There were times that she just essentially did not get out of bed.
Mm,
And so, if you're familiar with clinical depression and how debilitating it can be when when a person is not diagnosed and untreated, that can be literally. She was bedridden from her depression.
mm.
And as an 8, 9, 10-year-old child, there were days like I said, I'd have to cook for myself, get my own clothes, get myself prepared for school, come home, clean, get ready for dinner, get ready for school the next day. I mean, she would not get out of bed. I mean, I knew she was there. I knew she loved me. And it wasn't always that she was heavy into her depression. There were days that she was able to function. There were days that she did get out of bed. There were days that she did prepare food. So the inconsistencies were much more difficult for me because I didn't know from day to day how she would feel, and not knowing how she would feel or how she would function or how much involved she would be caused me to be very, it made me be very independent, because
Mhm.
I then realized that if I just go ahead and do it and not have the expectation or the confusion as to whether or not she would be able to help me with certain things, if I were just go ahead and do it myself, then I wouldn't be left holding the bag like, oh my gosh, she's not going to do it today.
You were
So I
never
just,
disappointed. Right.
yeah, just
Right.
not
Mhm.
disappointed at all. I just
Mhm.
go ahead and do it myself. So
Mm.
once I became an adult, and then I realized because it's all trauma, because I once realized all of the trauma that I had experienced, and that my friends and so many others that I interacted with, they didn't have these experiences. That's how, that obviously once I entered into the mental health field, I realized just how dysfunctional it
Mhm.
was and unhealthy it was. But I don't really see it. Sometimes when people hear the story, they see it as doom and gloom, and it's a bit depressing for them.
Mhm.
Um, it's not. I don't want people to feel like, oh my God. There were a lot of challenges. Yes, there were. but it was not an unhappy environment. It was not that I didn't that at any point that I thought that she didn't love me.
Right.
At times that she was not able to care for me, it wasn't because she didn't want to.
Right.
It was because she was not mentally and emotionally and psychologically able to do so.
I'm going to go so far to say that there's a good chance that maybe you wouldn't have a DR in front of your name if it weren't for your mom. I mean,
Correct.
that discipline just kind of paved the way for a higher education and being able to be disciplined and take on tasks that seem unsurmountable.
Yes, that's a really good point that you make, and I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
When you have such um, insurmountable responsibility at an early age, not realizing that's what it was, again,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, you're very independent and you're just a go-getter.
Sure.
So that
Make it
carried
happen.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just make
Mm-hmm.
it happen, and
Mm-hmm.
there's pros and cons to that. But if you can find a happy medium in there, and that's what I had to do. I had to find a happy medium where, even though I am still a very much so a go-getter,
Mm-hmm.
a very at times an overachiever, I had to find balance in there to say, okay, Sheila, you can relax,
Mm-hmm.
because it can create a lot of anxiety
Sure.
when you are constantly trying to achieve and constantly trying to dot every I and cross every T.
Mm-hmm.
So to find that balance, to be able to relax and unwind and unplug is something that I struggled with early on, because obviously as a child, I had to make sure that things were taken care of, not only
Yeah.
for myself, but also for my mother.
You
And
could
it
never
carried
be
on
off, right? You
it
could never
never
be off
be
it.
off.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-mm.
The interesting thing, well, we're talking about such a young age, 8, 9, 10.
Hmm.
I mean, from 8 to 18, there's such influential years where
Yes.
routine and repeating and you know getting used to the same thing is so important. I mean,
Yes.
I imagine that had to affect you in,
Hmm.
you know, maybe some. I love the way you're taking a turn to the positive, but not having routine, that would be. I think that's why probably like I'm telling you what psychologically, but that's why you felt like you needed to dot the I's and cross the T's because you didn't have
Yes.
routine.
No,
No.
and that's what I tell people was the most difficult part, was not having the routine and
Mm,
not being able to say, okay, most kids know that if there's 7 days in a week. So
mhm,
probably Monday through Friday, an 8, 9, 10-year-old child, 11, 12, maybe even 15 years old,
mhm.
mom's getting up and she is, preparing certain things for it, whether it's the night before, because maybe she has to go to work early that morning. I don't know.
School lunches,
Yeah, she's
unpacking
preparing the school
backpacks,
lunch.
right, mhm,
Yeah, okay, reminding you, make sure you have this,
right,
make sure you
sure,
have that. If she's not getting the clothes out that morning, I don't want to leave out dads, but there
sure,
is or grandparents. There's a parental figure
of course,
there that is making sure an 8-year-old, 9, 10, 11-year-old
right,
is well taken care of. So I
mm,
just thank God that I had that independent gene. I don't
mhm,
know if it was by force or choice, a
mhm,
combination of both.
mhm,
Sometimes they say nature, nurture, or
mhm,
combination of whatever, but
mhm,
it just happened for me, and I embraced it. And I kind of talk about that in the book. And my mother and I, we had a lot of conversations about this. Not so
right,
much early on, but as I got older,
sure,
she was just like, thank God you were that child that was able to just take the lead, because unfortunately she just wasn't able to do that. But yeah, you're right. The
mm,
inconsistencies were very challenging. And so for me early on, I knew that, okay, I have to depend on myself. And the other positive piece of it, and I still do this, obviously you can tell, and that's what the subtitle of the book is,
mhm,
transforming life's challenges into opportunities of
mm,
self-discovery. So
mhm,
those life challenges that I've gone through have given me the opportunities to look at things a different way. And I often tell clients or people that I work with, things are at times challenging. You go through life challenges, trials,
mhm,
tribulations, but what are you going to do with that? What's the life lesson?
mhm,
How can you flip that negative into a positive? And that's what I did subconsciously, not knowing,
Mhm.
taking the independence and taking those responsibilities and flipping it around. How can I use this to my advantage to make me a stronger, more independent, self-sufficient person? And that's what I quite naturally had to do. And then as an adult, you know, given the right circumstances or situations, you are able to tap back into those resources
Mhm.
and make things happen for yourself.
For our viewers and our listeners, say that they're taking care of someone that's maybe bipolar or having some emotional or mental disabilities, what advice would you give to them for that inconsistency and that never knowing which side of the person you're going to be exposed to, the
Mhm.
maybe the manic or the depressant, you know?
The biggest the biggest advice I would give is not to take it personal.
Ooh, that's hard.
Whether
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
very difficult, but it's in the back of your mind. Always know that whatever happens or doesn't happen, it's not your fault.
Mhm.
So if they are loving and excited to see you and in a very jovial, happy mood today, and then tomorrow they don't want to be bothered, 99.9% of the time, it really has nothing to do with you,
Mm.
nothing that you did or did not do.
Mm.
So that would be the biggest thing, the first thing that I would want to say. It is very difficult to, realize that, if somebody's treating you differently from day to day,
Hmm.
to say, okay, it's not my fault, because the first
Sure.
thing we want to do is blame ourselves.
Right.
But if you can keep that in the back of your mind, that would be my first thing that I would recommend. The second thing is to take time for yourself. I find that often caregivers, whether you're caring for someone with a mental illness or you're caring for someone with a terminal illness, whether it be cancer or any other type physical ailment, if you're caring for someone and you never take time for yourself, you experience burnout. And oftentimes we see that individual, the caregiver, suffer from not only physical, just exhaustion,
Mm.
but also you can start to have some emotional and or psychological challenges as well, whether it be
Absolutely.
anxiety, depression, or whatever. So you
It's
want to
hard on the
take
caregiver.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to take
Mm.
time for yourself
Mhm.
and recharge so that you can come back and continue to care for them.
Dr. Sheila, as an expert, you have a counseling service and an expert in this. I have to think about how wide mental illness is. I mean, it's a
Oh,
big cause for homelessness and people who are
yes,
incarcerated, and it's
yes,
so much more than just the people we're encountering in our families. Maybe it's us, you know?
yes.
I mean, this is a big problem, but there's such a stigma attached to it. Nobody wants to say it.
Nobody wants to say it. And I'm very thankful. I grew up in the 70s. We never would have I didn't hear conversations like this, like we're having now,
Right.
at all. I
I
didn't know
agree.
anyone, whether a family member, anyone at church,
Hmm.
even when I was in school, I never heard any of my friends talk about the parents.
Right.
You never heard about it.
It's true.
And at least now we're having conversations. I don't feel that we're having enough
Hmm.
conversations about it, but at least now we are having some conversations. At least where the subject does come up.
There's still a
Um,
lot of misconceptions, though, about it.
yes, very much so. I would agree
Mm.
with you. So I feel that hopefully we will continue to have conversations, and from the conversations, there will be resources available, made more readily available to individuals across the board, from children to adults and even to our elderly, who often suffer from so many different types of mental illnesses, depression being number one,
Mm.
because they're not able to do the things that they used to do in their youth. So they're
Sure.
suffering from physical ailments, and just, the body doesn't work the same way it did, at 80 that it did at 18, which
Mentally,
is
physically, emotionally, in
exactly.
all ways, yeah.
So it's quite natural that they experience some form of depression, because you're not able to do things for yourself. You have to rely on other people. Maybe their home environment has changed. Maybe they're in assisted living now. So there's so many aspects to mental wellness, as I like to call it. From, like I said, from our adolescence who the number two cause of death for adolescents now is actually suicide. So
Mm.
we have to realize that the suicide rates are not decreasing, they're actually increasing. We have to realize that when it comes to mental illness, it does not discriminate male, female, race, it does not discriminate whatsoever. So we have to take that into consideration, and we have to be willing to educate ourselves, and we have to take the stigma away. And I believe that if we take the stigma away, then we will realize that it's much more common than we think. And people will be less embarrassed and ashamed to talk about it, which hopefully they'll be less embarrassed and ashamed to go get help.
So that really brings up a good point. So say that you have a family member or a close friend and you see that they're kind of off the charts, they're off the radar with how they're behaving and things that they're going through. I mean, this is tough on them, but to that person that's normal, as you talked about.
Right.
What do you do? Do you make phone calls for them? I mean, do you recommend that they reach out for some help? I mean, what if they don't know that they need help because they're so deep into their depression?
Right. I would say that first and foremost, if an individual is a threat, or they're, probably so deep in their psychosis that you're concerned that they will hurt themselves or hurt someone else, then yes, you make the phone call to even to your local police department, and you state, I am the neighbor, I am a colleague, I am the mother, the sister, the aunt, the uncle, the father, or the child of a parent that is speaking very irrationally. They're stating that they want to harm themselves or they want to harm someone else. So
Mm,
you just stick to the facts, and yes, you make that call. If it's not to the point where they or you feel that they hurt someone else, but you are concerned about their overall that perhaps behaving or functioning in a healthy way as they perhaps used to. So you want to let them know that you love
right.
them, that you care about them. You want them to know that you're non-judgmental, but you're coming from a place of care and concern, and you kind of want to encourage them to make the phone calls or to go to the doctor. And perhaps if hopefully if you're close enough to that individual, you will offer to go with them as a support,
Mm,
because
great
it can
point.
be a difficult conversation. It can be very difficult conversation. Just having the conversation with your primary caregiver, not necessarily even seeking out a mental health professional. You can go to your primary care physician and let them know about those behavioral emotional concerns you have, and
Mhm.
your primary care physician can then refer you
Mm,
to a mental health professional. So that'll take one thing off your plate and having to
hmm.
do that. Just see your primary care physician and they can help you.
What are some other ways that we can try to get involved and make a difference with us?
Yes, one of the things is by volunteering.
Mm,
There's hopefully some mental health agencies in your location. You
mhm.
can contact NAMI.org,
Okay.
which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's an organization that I'm currently partnering with, and I offer I volunteer and I do trainings and workshops with them. But NAMI is national, so they should have a organization, or I should say an office located near you within your county or your city. If not, they can let you know of other mental health agencies or services in your area that you can hopefully volunteer, and just maybe even pass out pamphlets so that people are aware of suicide prevention or areas in which they can get help.
Mhm.
So yeah, just take it upon yourself to kind of get involved. One thing I often talk about is if you are affiliated with a church or a religious organization, they often hold health fairs, but in the health fairs, they sometimes, usually, they tend to leave out the mental health piece.
Mm,
So if you have a church that you're affiliated with, partner with a mental health agency, a
Mm,
psychologist, a mental health therapist, and invite them to your health fairs so that they can provide the information to your congregation and your members about the services that they offer.
that's a great point. We've got often dentists there and,
Yes.
checking, general physicians, but we forget about the
Checking the
mental and
blood
emotional.
pressure.
Mhm,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
Dr. Sheila, before we sign off,
Mhm.
tell me more about your book and who should read this?
I think actually everyone should read it because, again, mental illness does not discriminate. If you have not suffered a mental illness, perhaps someone that you know, someone you work with, a loved one, a family member, a church member, someone you know is suffering from a mental illness or has suffered from a mental illness. The statistics indicate that 1 in 5 American adults will experience a mental illness at some point in our lives.
Wow.
So if you know 10 people, there's 2 people in that 10 that is currently going through something or will at some point. So I would say My Mother's Keeper is a book that relates on so many different levels. Me from being a woman, me from being a child, me from being the caregiver as an adult
Mhm.
for a parent, me as a professional. I talk about that in my book as well. Me being a woman who had a very successful career, and I woke up one day and I did not have children. So there are so many different aspects of this book that in this memoir that people have been able to relate to on one, in one way or another. So
Sure.
My Mother's Keeper, I believe the success of the book is because it is so very transparent. It is so very real. It's not a novel. It is a memoir. It's a biography, and it's very relatable.
Mm,
So I wanted people to be able to have those experiences
sure.
through my story, and to be able to take those experiences and say, okay, I myself may not have a mental illness, but I know someone who does, and I'll pass the book on to them,
Sure.
or I will volunteer, or I will make sure that I get my own mental health checkups. Just as we get physical checkups every year, you can get a wellness exam to check your mental health status. And that's something that I encourage people to do. But you can purchase the book on Amazon. It's available, Barnes and Noble,
Okay.
Books a Million, even Walmart.com carries my book.
Oh,
So anywhere
wow, that's
that books are
great.
sold, yes, anywhere that books
Wow.
are sold, you can find My Mother's Keeper, or you can go directly to my website and
Got that
you
right
can purchase it there.
there.
Yes.
DrSheilaDWilliams.com.
Yes. Thank you.
So, Dr. Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your strength and for sharing it and passing it on to us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for watching the show. We hope that you enjoyed it. Having digital marketing for your product or organization is so crucial these days. People are ditching traditional advertising like print and broadcast commercials and turning to relationship marketing platforms like YouTube and podcasts that people can consume on demand on their time. Let's talk about how we can build your digital library with segments just like this.